What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence here with this week's episode of Required Reading. Now, we have four readings this week, all kind of capture a range. And so I'm not going to waste too much time. I'm going to jump right into it. And some at its surface may seem like, oh, okay, why do I have to read this? Not necessarily the first one. I'm going to kick off the first one, written by our brother Sean Crawley in last week's NPR NPR music article called At a Time Like This, Twinkie Clark's Gospel of Everyday Blackness. Now, if you kind of followed some of my postings on social media more recently, after capturing the Emmys, I found myself a bit frustrated, and I've noted it publicly for some time around the lack of recognition that I perceive of Ingenue Ellis for her depiction of Maddie Clark in the Lifetime original series of the Clark sisters. And so I think coming off of that and then seeing not necessarily a really clear and public acknowledgement through the award, through the Emmy season, I found myself drawn to this article that was written. And one of the things I think that is parallels just my sentiment is how he captures a lot of the black experience, particularly for black women. But I think there's a merit for the black experience in general. But I do think I want to center what he did here. Um, it often you often find in these award shows a lot of times the only time we're acknowledged is in crisis, or then the only time that the art form or anything we do is when there's crisis, when it's slavery, when it's the utmost level of suffering. But just the everyday mundane, the everyday life experience just doesn't seem as appealing enough for there to be excellence that is seen. And what Ashan does that is great, and I cannot do it. I cannot do this piece justice, which is why you have to read it. Is that he kind of parallels just that of even in the musicianship, in the skill, the style, the everyday experience that our sisters have in the church. In a similar way, we've overlooked how masterful, how beautiful, just like the flower he used the metaphor, how beautiful it is because we're looking for at least the crisis, that we don't appreciate the gift, the skills, not only of their overall story, but of just their lives. You have very beautiful, skilled, flawed individuals and humans that seem just so overlooked. And not for nothing that a movie captured their lives, but I think he also kind of brings it up when he talks about just the music, the actual songs, and how it just captures this duality, both kind of being overlooked, but ultimately just like how beautiful and skilled and masterful they are. Similar to the black experience, similar to the black experience of women, where they've publicly seen to not even capture or have any element of grace, of softness, of gentleness, because of the world that they've been subjected to. But he kind of parallels the music, where music is this space where the fullness and full embodiment of that part of the humanity is captured. And then ultimately just this movie capturing that across the board. So I said a lot, garble of words, but all to say, please read this article. Shout out to our brother Sean. The second article is Pandemic in the Fall and Winter by Janine Interlandi in this past Sunday's New York Times. Here's a takeaway. You probably read a lot and heard a lot about the pandemic. I'm sharing this because personally, I'm more sharing an encouragement, but also some exhortation to my brothers and sisters around this upcoming season. This captures kind of historically Octobers have been the moments when they've been worst, when anytime there's been some sort of pandemic that's occurred. Second, there's still a big gap in the data that we're receiving. So even though there's promise for vaccines, because of the speed at which this process is moving forward, there's high likelihood they won't work, and high likelihood there may be some unintended consequences for people taking it. But also because of the lack of data, which has been the biggest concern about this time, people don't really know whether or not, the real gravity of just what's going on. And the thing that stuck out to me beyond this is how Janine structured this article, but it talked about your fall and winter plans. I want you to read this because I don't want you to feel lost in all of the kerfluff of information, misinformation, and stuff that's going on. What I do want you to read is the implications this may have for your plans for the fall, because I think It's easy to think that things are going back to normal and you can go back into your normal course of activities, but this is also prone to highly susceptible times. And so my big push is for our brothers and sisters to kind of prepare accordingly heading into October, heading into November, in the same way that we were preparing as we were going into the summer to take that. But I would ask you to read and draw your own conclusions. And so that's my big thing. I want you to definitely read it. It's highly recommended, but I think it's going to allow you to really understand, even with all of this competing information, you still have some sort of certain takeaway of what this means for you. And I think your plans for the fall and winter, especially when you think about Thanksgiving and a lot of people travel, I think it's important to prepare with wisdom about what may happen. So again, I don't want to give too much away, but I'd love you to read. The next required reading is, I think it kind of touches a bit on something I touched a few weeks ago around this crisis and what it's meant for a population. So in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article: "No job, loads of debt, COVID upends middle class family finances." Big surprise, surprise. Of course, we know that. But what I think this article is helpful and what it points out is that we probably haven't even touched we probably haven't reached the tip of the iceberg because most of those who have lost jobs in terms of the data are not necessarily those who are in what you would call quote unquote white collar middle class roles. And even though many people already have, and what they're saying is that that it may get a lot worse than it gets better. And one of the main drivers of this challenge is just the high debt load, consumer debt load that most brothers and sisters, most Americans carry. And that being the reality of, well, when you can't bring in the level of income, just your basic income just to live, this exacerbates, this highlights just how bad this debt issue is, really, really is. And so I think that's something that they just talk about, how that snowballed, how student debt has been one of the major drivers of that, and how we actually really haven't hit the iceberg. And I'm seeing a lot of law firms lay people off and furlough. There's a lot more that's going to happen. And so it's all to say this is not just doomsday, but this is also for people who are trying to anticipate what this may mean for family. Ultimately, also, as you're kind of planning about the stability of job and the like, this kind of gives you the heads up that we may not have even touched the surface or really kind of seen the reality of the impact of what this may have. And so I'm putting this out there because I want y'all to read it and be able to take it in. Last required reading. This may seem a little like an odd one, but it's not. This is from The Economist, how Snowflake raised $3 billion in record software IPO. Now, you probably saw a whole bunch of news and clips and tweets about this big IPO, initial public offering by this company called Snowflake last week, which made a lot of people rich. But why does this matter for you? Now, I'm going to try to zip through this and give it in a somewhat of a summarized fashion and why this matters for everyday people. Now, this whole space is this issue of data storage, data accessibility, data reporting. And think of it like this, most of anything that you have in the digital realm needs to be stored. And so many companies historically have stored these in servers in the cloud, which has been some more of a recent move over the past 10 plus years. And it's become a really big deal because it costs money to store data. The data privacy issues and stuff has gone up. People are using data to actually sell. A lot of people are using their data to sell to other businesses, other clients. So you just think of this whole realm of data. Think of your banks. All of your stuff's is caught in the cloud in data. Facebook, most of the servers are in data centers, or I'm just giving this very general view. Why does this matter? Well, what this kind of software does is, again, it allows you to pull from multiple data sources, and you're able to, in a very kind of turnkey fashion, not only pull and manage and store major data for most of these major companies and organizations around the world. It allows you to access data a lot more easily at a more effective cost. It allows you to do a lot of things with data. Now, there's a reason why the Berkshire Hathaways and these big investors and people really have jumped in on this thing. But this also signals a shift, and I talked about this with our sister Angela with Streamalytics. We're moving towards a place. They talk about data being the new oil, and it's really about who has the data, who in terms of who has the power. Now, my view of this is because now data storage is becoming a lot easier. The accessibility is a lot easier. I think there's one greater risk, greater risk for, data. There's a lot more risk for data violations or data being stolen, and so there's just this overall concern, I would say, beyond the B2B view, business to business view of data, that as a consumer, I think it becomes more and more important for us to have a better understanding of safety of data, security of your data. Now that across the board in the marketplace, access to data and ability to store it more easily just get easier. It's like new levels, new devils. There's just more risk to deal with. Second, I do think this conversation about who owns what data is going to be important, because part of the reason why this is powerful is that now companies could more better monetize, meaning make money off of the data that they have, right? Because they can access, store it, draw reports, and they're able to sell it. But, I think especially in this kind of environment where people are realizing the importance of their data because of privacy concerns, but ultimately because, hey, I didn't opt into this. This is a whole new terrain. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with all these people having my data. There's going to be kind of this I would say this race to arms around who has the most data, who has access to it, who's allowed to, and who's not. And I think as the consumer, if you kind of sit back and are not paying attention, I think the decisions that have implications for you is going to go over your head. So I think it's important for us that the part of the reason I want you to read it is that some of the terms may kind of go over your head a bit, but what I want you to see is that this is where the world is moving. The power of data. And remember, most of these companies are own data that is yours. In some sense, this data is tied to you. You're going to see, I think, a counterbalancing tension around a lot of companies springing up that ultimately want you to kind of take more ownership of your data and for you to at least realize the value of the data that you actually have. But also, I think this is going to be a benefit because I think consumers are going to have greater concerns about the security of the data that they actually put out in the world. And they're going to want to have more and more control over that data, right? Sounds like a lot of blah. But I think this is why, as I shouted out our sister Angela with Streamalytics and allowing someone to see the streaming data, because most of these streaming companies or most of these companies essentially take the data from you and then sell it back. Now, I think as people are just trying to seek more opportunities for economic stability while at the same time protecting their data, because you don't know what the infinite future holds in terms of what's going to be done with it, you're going to have a lot of people really pushing back and saying, do I really feel comfortable with this? I think they'll be more comfortable with these companies holding my data now that the technology is making it that much easier for people to access data. And I think that's going to be a push. Unfortunately, I think you're going to see a lot more security breaches of data. And I think people are going to start to ask the question, do I feel comfortable anymore with my data being out there? What are some additional opportunities for me to secure my own data and ultimately make money off of my own data? Why should all these other people have all the fun? So I actually think that there's going to be a drive from business to consumer, a B2C play around this data, which I think this enables. And so I don't think Snowflake is going to be the only type of IPO in this space from a business to business standpoint. I think it's going to affect the consumer, us. So pay attention to this. I ask you to read it. It may be a little weird to read up front if this is not your space or anything like that. But I do want you to take away that there's a war going on outside nobody's safe from. There's activity happening that you should be aware of because it's going to impact you eventually. So again, these are the kind of the 4 articles. We have our brother Ashawn Crawley's article in the NPR. Please read it about the Clark sisters and Twinkie Clark. But it wasn't specifically just about that. It was about Black life, Black women's life, and how there's a parallel not only between flowers, but ultimately just the mundane and enjoying the beauty of the full human experience. He says it better than I do. The pandemic in the fall and winter. Takeaway, please prepare for the fall and be wise because there's a lot of things impacting your behavior now that ensures that may not necessarily lead to you making the best decisions. the article in the Wall Street Journal about debt. I think most of us are aware of that, but I think the takeaway for most of you all is that we probably haven't seen the real hammer drop as it relates to kind of job security. And so, because of just the debt load that most of us carry, I think we should start to be proactive in making plans with financial advisors and the like to say, what's the worst case scenario if I still have this debt load, but the income may not be where I want it to be. And then lastly, how Snowflake IPO. These are just one of those articles where I just don't want people to be in the dark and just clueless about what's happening around them and just saying, oh, wow, people are making money off of this. I think it signals a couple of things. One, higher risk to data breaches and the like, just because accessibility goes up, there's just new risks. Two, I think that I think for consumers, I think there's going to be a greater desire to want to take hold and own their data and know where it is. And I think that these technologies may allow it, so you're going to see more of a business to consumer play. That's my prediction, and that's my belief. So either way, I hope you enjoy this kind of different take, different flavor of a mixture of articles this week. But as always, let me know your thoughts.